The king and the archon, together with the polemarch and the sixth sesthmote, T-H-E-S-M-O-T-H-E-T-A-E, who had perhaps existed for a long time, completed the number of 9 annual magistrates, whom it was the custom to call the 9 archons, from the name of the first among them. So the first among them is an archon, and they just named the whole group archons. The revolution that took from royalty its political power was carried through under different forms in all the cities. At Argos, from the second generation of Dorian kings, royalty was so weakened, quote, that there was left to the descendants of Temenus only the name of king, without any power, end quote. Still, this royalty remained hereditary during several centuries. At Cyrene, the descendants of Battus at first united in their hands the priesthood and the political power, but after the 4th generation, nothing was left them but the priesthood. That is from Pausanias. At Cyrene, the descendants of Battus at first united in their hands the priesthood and the political power, but after the 4th generation, nothing was left them but the priesthood. That's from Herodotus. At Corinth, royalty was at first transmitted hereditarily by the family of the Baccadia. The effect of the revolution was to render the annual office, but without taking it from this family, whose members held it by turns for a century. Holy moly. Well, we are done with the ancient city, Fustel de Colanges. Pretty good read. An old one from the 1860s was written. Good book there. We might revisit it later. I doubt it, though. I think we're done with it. We're now going back to a history of the ancient world by Starr. I promised we would be in Athens for a bit here. Let's now go talk about the 6th century. By 500 BC, Athens and Sparta had developed those markedly different points of view on internal government and foreign relations, which were to be their lasting hallmarks. Sparta was by this date the greatest state in Greece, but Athens was rising rapidly. Besides these two, a number of other city-states played their part in the complicated interplay of Aegean history, which was now more continuously connected. Abroad, the Greek states in the Western Mediterranean fell into conflict with the Phoenicians and the Etruscans, and those on the east coast of Asia Minor were subjected first to Lydia, then to Persia. The Archaic Period is the last phase of Greek history in which one can consider the Aegean basin essentially by itself. Thereafter, the historian of Greece must also take into account first Persia, then Macedonia, and finally Rome. Now the next chapter in the book we just left, Fustel de Colanges, the ancient city, the next chapter was about the revolution at Rome. By 500 BC, many different types of states existed side by side in Greece. Athens had perhaps developed the furthest and was exhibiting democratic tendencies along with overseas naval interests. So now we're going to look about early Athenian history. We're going to look at Athens itself. So it says Athens was exhibiting democratic tendencies and overseas naval interests. Earlier Athenian history. With respect to the main economic activity of early Greece, subsistence agriculture, Attica was not favored. Its rainfall was relatively scanty for the rising of wheat, though adequate for vines and olive trees, which do need a rather dry climate. The commercial and industrial potentialities of the land were more promising. Attica was near alike to the islands, to the Boeotian plain, and to the Saronic Gulf. Its harbors were good, and it had excellent natural resources, such as good clay, the marble of Mount Pentelicus, and the silver mines of Laurium. We're going to talk a bit about the silver mines later. From the Dark Ages on Attica constituted one relatively large state, which possessed considerable attractive power over frontier districts. Eleusis, thus, was absorbed, probably in the 600s. By about 700, another important step had been taken in the replacement of the kings by elected magistrates. They were the 9 archons, who we have looked at. Many aspects of this aristocratic system are not entirely clear, but since we have more information for early Athens than any other Greek state, some of its main problems can be seen. In the 7th century, Athens suffered serious troubles. Economically, its potters had lost their earlier preeminence to Corinthian competition. The aristocrats treated the weak harshly. The poor farmers who owned land could not be dispossessed, but when they fell into debt, they often became virtual serfs of the rich. If so, they were bound to pay 1/6 of their meager produce to their creditors. Landless men could be enslaved and were sold abroad. Socially and politically, local territorial groups and noble factions were ill-controlled by the weak machinery of the state. Now, that's just a hint of what's going on. Just imagine there's a state, and the state is that thing which protects rights. Just put that definition down and say it has weak machinery. Local tribes and groups and stuff controlled things. They were socially and politically factitious, and the government couldn't control them. What is this? This is anarchy. We're going to hear just a bit more about that in a second. Aristocratic leaders vied ruthlessly for power and repute, and one discontented aristocrat, Cylon, or Cylon, C-Y-L-O-N, made an unsuccessful attempt to establish a tyranny about 632. Draco set down a law code about 620, but this failed to check the unrest. One of the things that Draco put under state legislation we'll get to. The remarkable ability of the Athenians at compromise, which marked much of their history, led in 594 to the election of Solon as single archon, or as reconciler. Solon was an aristocrat who had a broad outlook. He had traveled widely on business, and also had been a military leader of Athens in its struggle with nearby Megara for the offshore island of Salamis. Fortunately for our understanding of his career, he also wrote elegiac poetry, the sober idealism of which made it a treasured inheritance of later generations. During his year as virtual dictator, Solon rescued many of the Athenians sold abroad, abolished agricultural debts of the sixth part men, and forbade future bondage of the poor. He favored the production of olive oil, but banned the export of cereals needed by the growing population of Athens. He banned people from exporting food, probably produced some kinks in the economy, right? It probably reduced the amount of grain people trying to grow in the future because they couldn't sell it abroad, so I don't know, who knows. Trade and industry were also promoted by a number of detailed enactments, including the shift of weights and coins to the euboic standard, which was 1/3 lighter than that used before and more widely employed in the Mediterranean trade. Socially, he limited the exercise of aristocratic luxury and subtly reduced the power of the aristocrats by his political reforms. Now it talks about, like, you know how if you've got a real nice car, you're that good, and if you've got a less nice car, you're not so good, and if you've got a crappy car, you're a crappy person, if you don't have a car, you're worthless. That's been said. You know, people criticize America for the size of your house, or the size of your car, or the job, or the size of your income, or something determines how good you are. Well, in Athens, Solon, quote, regrouped the citizenry into 4 classes on the basis of wealth, measured in terms of agricultural produce. Only men in the first 2 classes could hold major offices, but all had a voice in the Athenian assembly and in the courts of law. So they grouped you in your wherever you went in society. They grouped you according to how much your farm or your possessions produced per year. Kind of like the IRS coming around to see which aristocratic class you fall into this year, depending on how productive your land is, how good you've done doing this, that, and the other. Interesting culture, huh? The courts of law heard appeals from the officials and eventually came to audit and inspect the activities of officials. The assembly now was to become more effective, and to secure this end, Solon established a new council of 400, a standing committee, chosen to prepare business for popular debate and vote. Extensive reorganization and codification of the religious and civil law of Athens were also achieved. Brand that statement in your mind, not the statement, but the term, the Council of 400. That should be something that should come to mind when you think of Athens, or ancient Greece. As Solon repeatedly emphasized in his poetry, he stood in the middle, quote,